For many of you, Dr. Susan McDaniel needs no introduction. I'm not going to describe her early childhood or her education because it comes up in the interview today. She is really an amazing person. She has served as the APA president. She's had so many awards. It would take our whole presentation time for me to list all of her achievements. But some of the most interesting things right now about her, she has a joint appointment in the Department of Psychiatry and the Department of Family Medicine, and she's currently the vice chair for the Department of Family Medicine. I really want, especially you early career folks, to listen to her journey, because if you only look at her at where she's achieved things, you're going to think, oh, I could never achieve that. But listen to the entire trajectory, and you might be able to see yourself in that trajectory as well. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, I am really excited to get to interview you, not just about the role of family within family medicine, but also about the development of your professional identity. It is such an interesting story. And I was hoping you would share some of those early experiences you had that predisposed you towards systems thinking.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you. It's really an honor. And probably the first most relevant thing is my father was a physician and OBGYN. My parents are both from North Carolina. I come from a Southern family, although my father, after training, they moved to South Florida. So I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, which makes ending up in Rochester a question mark, reverse immigration. So my father was the kind of physician that when we were out and about, people would stop him and want to talk to him. And I learned pretty early the role of respect that a good physician has. And he worked very hard, often delivering babies in the middle of the night, coming in the door when I was going to school. Clearly a difficult job, but rewarding. He was very dedicated to it in that old-fashioned way they were. I would say that his strength was kindness and competence. It wasn't exactly psychosocial skills. And there's some kind of way that must have gotten transmitted to me fairly early on, in part because I was female and females weren't really encouraged to go into medicine. That wasn't something that I aspired to. I also am glad that I'm a family therapist and a psychologist. That's the right skill set for me. But there was that, be a teacher or a nurse thing going when I was growing up. In terms of systems issues, I do think Southern culture is fairly family oriented, not always in a healthy way, but still true. So I grew up apart from my extended family, but we went to North Carolina every year in the summer to visit all the rest of the extended family who stayed put. And my parents sent me back to North Carolina to school. So I went to college at Duke and graduate school at UNC at Chapel Hill. So I was fairly well steeped in that kind of culture, even in Fort Lauderdale. Trying to understand Southern culture can breed a psychologist because you learn that what's on the surface isn't what's actually going on lots of times. That is interesting, frustrating, useful, many different things. Mm-hmm. I think the next thing that had a big influence on me was when I was in middle school and the federal government ordered many of the southern states to desegregate the schools. And that had a big influence on me. I can remember having, at the time, African-American students suddenly showing up and the anxiety primarily of the adults in the situation, and trying to navigate that as best we could. It had a big influence on me. And I think as painful as it all was, it was also a useful experience, such that when I finally did move up north, I was shocked at how segregated it was. Right. Like the attitudes were different, but the personal relationships were more segregated than where I lived before I moved up north. So I think that actually keeping groups apart that have commonality and kind of tribalism, I think had a big effect on me. I told my parents in high school that I wanted to go to college to study stereotypes. And I know that's why.
Right.
And they looked at me like, what? And then I was a cultural anthropology major, so I sort of did do that. And I think that going to psychology graduate school and getting interest, I went to a good clinical psychology, individually oriented graduate school. And I intentionally, but I couldn't tell you exactly why, I wanted an internship that was more child and family focused.
Mhm.
And so I went to University of Texas Medical Branch and worked with Harry Galishan and Harlene Anderson for my internship, and then went back to Houston and Galveston for a postdoc because I realized it's a complex set of skills to learn. As an intern, once I realized what it was, I was never have looked back. And think of a systems framework as being sort of the toolbox within which you can use many different tools, CBT, this, that, and the other, but the general conceptualization being systemic and relationally focused, I think is really fascinating. And for me, a much better explanation of what I was seeing with patients than just a narrower view. So I was very turned on about it. When I went back to do my dissertation, my professors, who I admired and liked very much, were kind of horrified by what I like. We're behind the mirror, and then we call into the session, and when I saw one of my supervisor's face turning red and redder as I'm talking, I thought, I'm not really succeeding here. And I think now I won't talk about it anymore. So I didn't. I got my degree. I am appreciative of what they gave me. And then I went back to Texas for some more training. That's the story about family systems. And my then boyfriend was a med peds resident went to a med peds residency in Rochester when I went to Texas for my fellowship. And so just pure happenstance, because I had no job and didn't know anybody but him, which is like ridiculous, and moved to what my family called Siberia. I worked at a mental health center for 2 years before family medicine people who were rotating with my husband through various parts, because the med peds residents and the family medicine residents crossed over some. And one of them said, we're going to hire a psychologist. Why don't you have Susan apply? I talked to various people at the medical center who my husband was training with, who said, family medicine is the stepchild of medicine. Don't do it. Like the same thing they tell medical students.
Sure.
You're too smart to go to family medicine, that kind of stuff. So I thought, I don't really think I agree. And at that point, I was 28. What did I have to lose? I started and at 0.3, and they'd never had a woman. They'd never had somebody who wasn't a physician. And I do honestly think they thought, how hard can this be? She's a psychologist, I said, when are the faculty meetings? And he said, you're 0.3. I don't really think you need to come. I knew, at least I was smart enough then, like I said, he did tell me when they are, and I said I'd be there. And then the next year I filled out my FTE. It ended up being 0.4 family medicine, 0.6 psychiatry, because they were starting a family therapy training program and needed some help with somebody who had been trained. And I was just very lucky to come to the University of Rochester at what was the last 10 years in George Engel, father of the biopsychosocial approach, spent all his career as an internist in the Department of Psychiatry at Rochester. So he was there. And Lyman Wen, one of the people who started family therapy, about the same age as George. So I overlapped with both of them in the first 10 years of my career. I really couldn't have planned it better, but I didn't know. I was just stumbling around. I'd had a supervisor, a family psychiatrist in Houston, who told me, read everything that Lyman Wynn ever wrote and then knock on his door. I'm like, I'm not doing that. But he persuaded me I should do that. So I did do that. And, he was a wonderful, wonderful mentor. And George was a quirky guy who understood that he really didn't focus on the family level of his biopsychosocial model, but that somebody needed to. So he was very supportive. He also knew he didn't really do much with the interaction between the levels. Like he wasn't a relationship guy. He was much more of a, let's look at our personal emotions guy. I would say my work really is the integration of George's biopsychosocial approach and Lyman's family therapy approach, both of which are rooted in general systems theory that became so popular at the turn of the 20th century. So they have common roots, but they then sort of branched out at different parts of the tree. It was only, I think, towards the end did Lyman and George really sort of get together and recognize that. And it was great. I have all of Lyman's collected works of Sigmund Freud, of which takes up a whole bookshelf. And I have many of George's doodles. He used to do doodles in between seeing patients. So I have a couple. His wife was an artist and she would frame them in sort of peculiar ways. So I have in both my family medicine and psychiatry offices, I have George's doodles up there. So they're very much a part of my intellectual and personal life at work.
I just love the wonderful serendipity of here comes somebody with exposure to medicine from an early stage and a kind of a bone deep understanding that warm relationship between the physician and the patient is important. Somebody who's interested in greater systems, who has training in family therapy, is thrown into a situation with just the right people.
Right. My family medicine colleagues were fantastic and have had a huge influence on my learning. That's what happened after I got on board, and then Tom Campbell joined the faculty the next year, and he taught me a lot about primary care, and I taught him about systems stuff, and we hammered out various compromises so that what was said that we taught was practical enough for him and had at least some theoretical grounding for me. So yeah, I was very fortunate because none of it was planned, and that doesn't really fit with usually how people talk about what you want to do with your career. I'm a big fan of trying to put yourself in as good a situation as you can and then take advantage of opportunities you never saw coming.
Right. Yeah, I'm a big believer of that myself. I've had several course corrections in my career, and all of which led to things that are wonderful that I never would have imagined. I never
Right.
intended to be a psychologist, and for sure I never was going to be an educator. And yet these are the things that make me the happiest and most fulfilled.
Right.
And that whole concept of the role of women, it's so interesting. You're a generation ahead of me, but even in my generation, there was, okay. But there was certainly that differing expectations. I still grew up when girls learned stenography in high school.
Oh, we didn't have that. We did have to take typing, for which I was really mad and now very grateful.
Yes. So along the way, you have some really interesting thoughts, I think, about confidence and leadership that I think are appropriate kind of in this context of when you find yourself in a situation of opportunity. And I'm wondering whether you'd be willing to elaborate a little bit more about those.
Sure. I'm not quite sure which part you're hanging that on.
Yeah. So, when you're put into a situation where you haven't prepared for it. Here's this great opportunity in your lap, and maybe you don't feel like you're the perfect person for it.
Right. I certainly was not at all confident when I started in family medicine. And I think, like is often true when you're trying to introduce a new paradigm or a different foreign object into a group, there was a fair amount of resistance from people especially one person who are, I think, really well-meaning, but we are not on the same page. And let's just say, so there are these faculty meetings and faculty groups where there are like 8 guys and me for 3 years. But really early on, I got into it, which isn't really my style, believe it or not, but with somebody who was a powerful person in the faculty, at which point, within maybe 20 minutes of some contentious thing in a group setting, I started bawling like a baby. I mean, I was like, oh my God, which completely freaked them out. Like, we knew we were going to have a woman, but really, she's bawling at our meeting. And with other people being freaked out that this one guy was really hammering me. And I was not well equipped for the job. Anyway, somehow we made it through. I'm vice chair of the department now, decades later. And interestingly, he, many years later, before he took another job, wrote a long letter of apology, which was totally unexpected. I was shocked. That was difficult, but I think there's always going to be something like that. And I think while I felt really not confident, I couldn't see how strange my contributions were to people who are, it's not like these people aren't psychosocially skillful, they really were. And I think in some ways, maybe that was part of it, that they already thought that they were that way. And then I'm saying this stuff and they're like, anyway, it took time. It took a lot of time, a number of years. The 3rd year, I was teaching psychosocial medicine core seminars, and that particular residency class really fought with me about it because they said that their patients were poor, and it was that mattered, not their families. And no matter how many times I said, no, the social's important, the relational's important, it's all important.
Right.
They fought and I was reactive. It was probably not very pretty on either of our parts, but that went on for about a year or so. And for whatever reason, over time, suddenly, it seemed to me, they were like agreeing with me and we weren't having trouble anymore. And, it's like the culture changes and you can't quite say what it was that happened. The ringleader of that group ended up as a chair of a family medicine department. Oh, and his first job, I love this. His first job was, he was the behavioral scientist for a residency program. So I'm like, come on. We were by then friendly. Several decades later, unbeknownst to me, he was on the awards committee for STFM, the big recognition award. I was shocked when they called and said they were giving it to me. And then I looked at who was on the awards committee and I thought, and he likes to tell this story too. I thought, you're paying me back for that hazing you put me through, which he agrees that is what was going on. So, sometimes good things come out of really stressful situations. Anyway, I think being young and there wasn't a developed behavioral science position. Before I came, there were psychiatrists who came for weekly crisis rounds. And the other interesting thing about the behavioral science form is it really, it may be true now, but then when I went fairly early on, and I don't know, 84 maybe, I was definitely the only family therapist there. So I was really surprised. I mean, at least I was trained as a psychologist, so I knew how to, code switch. But so there was that too. And what happened after that is more probably at STFM and the family and family medicine meetings, I began to make friends with people who were family therapy oriented, like Bill Doherty and Jerry Hepworth, and eventually Julie Shermer and Larry Mausch and John Rowland. So people like that who we were all very interested in the application of family systems to primary care and healthcare more broadly. And those relationships became extremely important to me. And there was a tight-knit group of people that went to those family meetings. And I think it was very stimulating intellectually and important to the development of our ideas.
Yeah. Are you talking about the Family Systems and Health Conference?
Yeah, it was called the Family and Family Medicine.
Mhm. And I attended one of the very last ones, I think the second to last one, right when I was coming into family medicine education. And it was such a wonderful and valuable conference, and one that I was very sad to see come to an end.
Boy, we were devastated.
Mhm.
So yeah, CFHA started before that ended,
Mhm.
because I think there was a need for an interdisciplinary, medically interdisciplinary as well as otherwise interdisciplinary group. And SDFM was very clear that they wanted family and family medicine to stay family medicine, which we were proposing something different, that family medicine be the hosting ground for some more interprofessional training. So we sort of lost that one.
Would it be okay if we circled back a little bit? Because I think
Sure.
there's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to some of our listeners today. And that is when you're early on in your career and the experience of being hazed as the behavioral scientist and the vulnerability and the emotion, it can be pretty hard to survive. I mean, I think we see a lot of people come into this field and they don't stay. What were some of the things that you used to survive that difficult transition?
So I really am not sure why I stayed, to be honest.
Mhm.
But, actually, I do think I know why I stayed. Number one, the people were terrific. Like I really was aligned with family medicine values and mission.
Mhm.
Like that was in alignment. The cultural differences, even though I grew up I had the advantage of not being intimidated by physicians. So I think that helped hugely.
Mhm.
Like I know what my dad's strengths and weaknesses are. And my boyfriend and now husband is a physician, put on their pants the same way everybody else does. So that helps. And I really, when I'm training people, I really try hard to help them focus on the person and the relationship and not the role, which is hard when you're insecure yourself as a behavioral scientist.
Right.
It's hard. But if you can hang in there long enough and start to realize, oh yeah, I do know, like a lot of what I know is really a huge help to these people.
Mhm.
I think that helps get through it too. Like some early wins are very
Yes.
helpful. When you have, which wasn't true then, a network or a support group or the Behavioral Science Forum or the SDFM colleagues in other places, the fellowship, I think it's enormously helpful because the cultural differences in our training, as we understand now, are really significant. And we have to be able to come together. And I think we need each other, but you have to get to the point where that's true. I do think also my cultural anthropology training was really helpful. I could see pretty quickly, oh, this is like when I was in middle school or high school, and we're in these different tribes and we're trying to find our commonality. And pretty early on, I think maybe the first plenary I did at the Family and Family Medicine meeting was this skit that Tom Campbell and I did, making fun of, he was the extreme physician, but plenty recognizable. And I was the extreme therapist. I was a little crazy. He was kind of a jerk. People loved it, but it elevated, it made clear, like these really are significant differences and we have to acknowledge them and work with them so that, because that's the only way you can implement a biopsychosocial model is if you bring these things together. But, it's like, how do you support yourself and have enough armor to be able and not take personally? Of course, I took that bawling episode. I was wounded beyond belief and it was all personal and, blah, blah, blah. Now I look back and think like, yeah, what did you expect, sweetheart? I was looking for validation and acceptance. And we wanted to hire you, but we didn't think we were going to have to share power or curriculum or wait a minute, what? You're asking for that? And so I think that consciously and unconsciously went on till it got worked out. The people are just terrific. The mission, the people focusing on relationship more than role. And then if you have a support network, so that it normalized some of the things that have to happen. If,
Right.
I think it's why so many of our colleagues are like, no way, I'm not working in healthcare. They're not, because in fact, one of my supervisors in Houston, one of my favorite supervisors said, why would you want to go up there? So there's first up there, why would you want to go up there? And then, and hang out with all those physicians? Like, that just sounded to him like, you're a talented person. Why would you do that? There's just a lot. And I think that physicians either aren't trained about us at all. So they sort of think, I don't know what they think we are, but hand holders is what they think we are actually. How hard can that be? And then we're trained that they want power and control, and it's going to be awful. I think those themes of sort of othering everybody, not paying attention to relationship and people, seeing human beings in front of you, talents emerging for what they are individually and because of our training. And I think team-based care now really helps with that. Not that we're there yet, we definitely aren't, but the idea that the person who has the best skills and relationship with the patient is the one that may drive the bus right now, and how we're going to share and collaborate and optimize each other's for the benefit of the patient and to take care of each other, frankly.
Yeah.
So I think things have come a long way, but the early days, we do lose people, and it's understandable why.
Yeah. Now, and historically looking at how things have changed, I think there has been more of an acceptance for the role of the behavioral scientist within the group. One of the things that I'm a little concerned about is this whole concept of family systems or integrating the family. I think some of the changes in how we practice medicine, how much time we have, how do we document medicine, has really created some challenges. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I completely agree. Nobody integrated a genogram program into Epic. The whole checkbox thing.
Yeah.
And drive towards efficiency. On the one hand, the access problems are significant.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, losing sight of the relationship, which I think most family physicians go into family medicine because they like the relationship. So they fight against that some, and we can help them figure out how to successfully fight against it. But you're right that some of the systems issues are not good. On the other hand, I think CMS got tired of telling physicians to care about what patients think. And when they started monetizing patient satisfaction surveys, like you really are going to have to care what the patients think. And if we can help them realize that sometimes the family fills those surveys out, and if they don't fill them out, their point of view probably has an influence. So even if you only care about it for that reason, which I think is not most family physicians, they care about it for the right reasons. I see opportunities that never used to be there.
Yeah.
I also agree that very concrete and somewhat simplistic behavioral interventions are what fits with Epic, etc. I think when that can work, it's great. It just doesn't often work by itself. So I am as big a fan, or maybe more a fan, of a systems or family approach than when I started.
Yeah, and I just wanted to interject for a little bit. I'm really hoping that this session will encourage early career behavioral scientists to consider this area as an opportunity. There's really clear evidence that families influence health behavior change, hospital readmission rates, which means money, right, for your hospital, and mental health. Families and friends attend medical appointments. And we've seen just recently how difficult hospital care is when people are isolated from their supports. So there's a need for ongoing research into the role of families and larger community systems on healthcare. And we really need some of you to work on methods to help family physicians and behavioral health clinicians intervene in clinically meaningful ways within the current practice environment. I mean, it's a huge need, and it's a huge opportunity. And I hope some of them will take this the same way that you did when you walked into Rochester, right? And there's a need and you stepped into it. And it's my hope that we'll have some listeners be inspired in that way.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh, one of the other things we talked about as we prepared for this was how family medicine education is increasingly constrained by the skill set that the core faculty members come with. It's like the luck of the draw about what you get. Do you have any ideas about how we might deepen training in family systems knowledge and skills for our core faculty?
Two comments. One is, because we were developing this family therapy training program in psychiatry, many, including people that are still around, like Ron Epstein, but there was a point in time when most of our family physician faculty had trained in the family therapy training program. And like Tom Campbell did a fellowship with George Engel, and then he did some of the family therapy training program. So even though we did think about things very differently, there's a huge, compared to other people, overlap. We had a shared mental model pretty quickly. And finding family physician collaborators who have an interest in the psychosocial aspects of medicine, and there are a lot of them. They just might not have so much training, but they have an interest. I think that is a really important piece in terms of, we have a lot to learn when we come into the discipline. Understanding primary care is a complex business, and having somebody that, at least one person, if not more, who can teach us about that while we try to figure out what do they need from us. And I do think medicine broadly, and certainly in primary care, a lot of the difficulties come from not tending to the social determinants of health, family issues, and psychosocial issues. So there's this big hole in the way American medicine is organized,
Right.
that we can step right into, and each context has something different. It has a different need, that trying to figure out what in your department or your clinic, what is it they are asking for? How can you deliver it and begin to build a foundation? I mean, I think it's like a presenting complaint with a patient or family.
Right.
You want to speak to what they think they want, and then you want to give them what they need. So it's like that. And so I think that I wanted to make sure to emphasize, I think it's really important to have close collaborations with our family medicine physician and NP colleagues.
Yeah.
Then I think looking for opportunities, hopefully at STFM and at the Behavioral Science Forum and at the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association, to get some systems training. And there are good, Sandy Blunt started something that is online and whatever at UMass that's still going on. We have a 5-day medical family therapy and integrated care intensive that's been going for, I think this will be our 28th year. And it's a wonderful experience. We keep it relatively small, so the intensive part of it is accurate, but I think it really helps with understanding what's a systems approach to integrated care and to medical education, as opposed to solely a more individually focused approach. There are a lot of good trainings out there, but it's not like we could say, go to the family and family medicine meeting and you'll get your needs met.
Right. And I just want to encourage people out there who might be systems thinkers. I'm always looking for proposals for the forum. I always feel like I'm knocking on people's doors asking for them to give more family and systems oriented proposals. So please know that I'm very open to that. Susan, you're currently working on a physician consultation service. Could you explain how this is a natural outgrowth of your focus on family systems?
I mentioned before that CMS started in about 2010 saying that they were going to have a small percentage of physician and hospital reimbursement based on patient satisfaction surveys. But even a small percentage is still a lot of money given the money in healthcare. So that kind of freaked out administrators and leaders, being unsure exactly how that was going to go, since that wasn't their primary focus. I think really is biomedical outcomes, not patient satisfaction. So this shifted them a little bit. I was doing a leadership program, ELAM. Some people may know what that is, a leadership program for women leaders in academic medicine. I needed a systems-wide project approved by the dean. And so he said, can you figure something out for this patient satisfaction thing? So I don't quite remember how I got there, but I do well remember sitting for an afternoon with Ron Epstein, who some of you may know, Dr. Mindfulness. He's a good researcher, and talking about developing a physician communication coaching program and doing a pilot study to see if the focus that we developed would be useful. And working with him, came up with using the Calgary-Cambridge Patient-Centered Care Behavioral Observation Checklist, 54 items, to code physician-patient interaction. The checklist had nothing about emotion on it. Like, really? Okay. Like empathy, not on it. Filled in the holes there, and also nothing about family members, nobody else in the visit. So filled in the holes there. And then did a pilot of 12 physicians, 6 surgeons, and 6, quote, cognitive physicians. 6 of them had high patient satisfaction scores, 6 of them had low. And then it just fell out to be 8 men and 4 women. Spend 4 hours with each physician, coding each patient-physician interaction, and then compile the quantitative part, and also take a lot of notes quoting, patient said this, and then you said that, and write a pretty extensive, like, I just did, I think, the longest one I've ever done on somebody was having a lot of problems a few days ago, and it's 13 and a half single-space pages. Makes the old psychology reports I did look easy. But anyway, it's quite the experience for them. And I think we benefit from low expectations, a situation that I really like. I'm sure when this guy gets the report, he will be knocked out of his chair. I think it's quite the experience to read a description of you. It's like seeing a painting of you, but it's a verbal description of how you behave as a physician with data and then qualitative information. It's organized by the interview, the sections of the interview. In the greeting part, you do this 7 out of 12 times, you did that 8 out of 12 times, etc. Steps through all the parts of the interview and tells them, you are so great at this, and this is wonderful, and this is wonderful, and this is wonderful. You might want to try a little of that. And goes through that process, at the end of which summarizes their strengths and suggestions. And then we meet for at least an hour. It's often hard to get them out of my office to discuss the experience. And it, in a way that I really didn't see coming. Obviously, it's relationally oriented. It's about the doctor-patient relationship, but it also really often reconnects them to why they went into medicine and what really matters to them about the patients. It's very touching. The debrief sessions are usually very touching and important. You know, we work with people who do it for malpractice reduction, or because they think it's a good idea, or because they're division chiefs that everybody is going to do it this year. I've worked in every department in the medical school. We now have 8 or maybe 10 people in training. We have our psychology fellows plus other faculty who want to train as communication coaches. So that's a day a week for 2 years before they're fully done. And they're embedded in residencies across the medical center. So we are embedded in 12 residencies now, all of whom have come to us asking us to do it. I think it is a wonderful delivery system for promoting family medicine skills and values across neurosurgery, orthopedics. And I certainly, many times, having stayed in the same place for my whole career, would talk to various people around the medical school about how they needed behavioral scientists in this program or that program or whatever. they would either be really polite and it would go nowhere, or occasionally somebody would say, well, my patients don't have those problems. Okay. And now the demand for what in some ways is exactly the same thing delivered very differently.
Yeah.
We cannot keep up with the requests for outside of residency. So the faculty level of it, which is the prime program, is utilized a lot for professionalism problems with faculty and leaders, as well as for malpractice reduction and stuff. And several weeks ago, the vice president for research called about, could we do this with research teams? And the medical dean, could we do it with medical students? At which I said, we don't have the capacity. Occasionally we can include them with the residents, but we have to target the faculty first, because they're the ones that get reimbursed for the patient satisfaction surveys to get back to the original request.
Well, and they're
So
the role
it's,
models for the medical students. I mean, if you
yes,
help the faculty, it will trickle down.
well, that was the justification. That was the good reason, and the other reason was money. So that is, the dean did talk more about that than he did the money, but it's been a very successful way to engage with a variety of people about some of the things that we care about and be able to really expand on what family medicine embraces.
That is amazing.
And that is just falling into it. I mean,
yeah. So we're getting fairly close to the end here. Is there one thing that you've done that you would most like to share with others that maybe they don't know?
I think I'm most excited, for the past decade about the communication coaching program, and we talked about that.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other thing that I would say is I don't think our training has caught up with what the actual need of patients and the system are. And I worry about that some. We need people who understand integrated care to be in the graduate programs, because a lot of what's trained in the graduate programs is to either work in a mental health center or independent practice. And there's such a need for good mental health professionals and behavioral scientists in our hospitals, our clinics, and our healthcare academic medicine centers. So I hope that we can all contribute to that, so that it's such an exciting area. It's not without its challenges, but that's true for anything. I did do private practice for 2 years, and I love seeing patients, but I was seeing some of the same problems from different people.
Right.
Anyway, I started seeing the repetition and thought, I need diversity in my work life, and there's no shortage of that.
That's what I love about education. I worked in a hospital system, and I did lots of individual psychotherapy. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to add testing that will give me enough variety. And then that wasn't enough. And then I ran an inpatient unit, and that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And then I came into family medicine, and there's plenty of variety in my day.
Right. Yeah, it's great. I really feel so lucky that I ended up, being grounded in family medicine.
That's awesome. So I want to invite our participants to share with us any questions they may have, and people can log back in and sit back down at their computers, and we can finish up the presentation.
Sounds great. All right. Hi, everybody. Get you on a better screen.
So, Susan, the question was, do you have any wise words for those of us trying to secure funding for integrated care positions to get more boots on the ground?
Yeah, it's really hard right now, isn't it? I think that there are a variety of ways to do it. Sometimes, speaking personally, we've had to figure out how many brief sessions that were reimbursable we'd have to do to cover somebody's salary. And sometimes that meant like 50% reimbursable, 50% collaborative care. Sometimes a lot of places have had to get grants to get things started. HRSA has grants, and sometimes local foundations will have grants, and that really, I think, helps get things off the ground and prove our worth so that they're willing to use some of their profits to cover our cost, which is what it comes down to. We have people in, I don't know, probably 8 clinical departments now and 12 residencies. And we use every kind of funding mechanism there is. It's not all the same. So it just depends on how you get in, having people speak to how great you are. Sometimes I was able to for just a brief period, like 0.2 or 0.4 of somebody in OBGYN in the fertility clinic, I was able to negotiate them just paying for it straight out. Because compared to their salaries, we look like we didn't make anything. In primary care, it's a bit more difficult. They don't have that kind of slush funds to deal with.
And Gina Mercer asks, what relational skill foundations and advocacy do you suggest in medical school education when behavioral health didactics or simulation time is so limited?
I thought you guys were going to ask the easy questions. Come on. It's really tough. I think that, it's the same thing we always do, which is find out what most frustrates medical educators and then talk about how that's exactly what you're interested in, because usually it is, and offer to help with difficult patients, with professionalism issues, with medical students, things that aren't particularly our language, but are exactly what our skill set's for. Because if we can help where somebody else can't, that's the way in. I'll just say a little bit more. After years of trying to spread the gospel of family medicine, psychosocial issues to other departments, pretty much unsuccessfully, because some of them said, my patients don't have that problem. We somehow, well, not somehow, the dean asked for a program that would help physicians with their patient satisfaction scores. And so I developed this physician communication coaching program, and that's what, calling it that, and helping with patients that are difficult and faculty and residents who are having professionalism problems with exactly the same skills that I would have used before, but calling it coaching and about communication. That's how we're in 12 different departments now. I can't keep up with what people are asking for, but I had those same problems you all were talking about when I started in 1982, and it's just a long slog. You have to find what can work where you are and have good national colleagues to talk about. Jerry Hepworth and Bill Doherty were really, and others, Mac Baird, really key in sort of keeping me going when it was discouraging, but I still believed in the cause. So I think that's another thing, getting a family medicine colleague to teach you about primary care. That occurred for me with Tom Campbell, and I taught him about family therapy and we worked it out, but definitely having physician allies is really important. But you can see, try not to get too discouraged, because I'm completely convinced that what you all have to offer, what we all have to offer, is much of what the problem is in healthcare. And the fact that we don't fit in the paradigm right now is the point. If the paradigm right now worked, we wouldn't have all the problems in healthcare that we have. So keep the faith.
We may have time for one more question or comment.
I'll just say, if you're interested in the communication coaching, there are 2 articles out about it right now. They're not in this list, I don't think, no. One's by, first author is Andrea Garraway. And the second one is in Family Systems and Health, and I'm the first author, if you want to look at that. So is there one more question, Julie?
I am not seeing any other ones. Oh, but Amy turned her. She's signaling.
Yeah, I just wanted to Hi, I just wanted to comment how delightful this session was. I feel like I was in a room having coffee with the two of you. It was wonderful to hear more about your journey, Susan, and Julie. You did such a great job asking questions, and like the same curiosities that I had, I felt like you were experiencing them too. And so I just want to say thanks to you both for this great Zoom buster.
Well,
it's raining here in Michigan, but I did get some laundry done while we were doing this, so I couldn't go for my walk.
It's raining here also, and thanks for everybody who came to this. And I completely and thoroughly enjoyed speaking with Julie. It was a little bit more like wine than coffee, but it was great.
I love these. I'm going to miss these next year when we're in person, but not enough to not meet in person.
No, I can't wait to see everybody. Cannot wait. Hi, Val.
All right.
Hi, Susan. It's wonderful to hear you again. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me and for staying around for the Q&A. Really appreciate it, and have a great meeting. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you all, and we will see your next session start at 3:30.